this morning, we are together as family and friends to render a final salute to Arnie Turnquist, Chief Warrant Officer for U.S. Navy, retired. Arnie Turnquist, a decorated serviceman and veteran of the Korean War, Vietnam conflict, and Cold War, served in the U.S. Navy for over 35 years. At the time of his retirement, Arnie was the most senior communications warrant officer in the Navy. And following his retirement from the Navy, Arnie continued his service as he went to work for the Betty Ford Center as a member of the training department, providing training for professionals, and he helped to start the Summer Institute for Medical Students, or known as SIMS. He retired after 20 years, but loved it so much that he stayed on to do volunteer work. It is only fitting that this celebration be held here on the flight deck of the USS Midway, for the Navy and the sea was home for Arnie. So I'd ask you to stand with me for the invocation. Father of all mercies, we remember before you the day, this life of Arnie Turnquist. In this life, he served you faithfully as a son, a brother, an officer, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a great-great-grandfather, and more than that, our friend. In living, Arnie instilled the values that he cherished: service, dedication, and integrity. And in our grief, we're reminded of the esteem in which we held him. Console us, Lord, with the knowledge that in life, Arnie transformed us by giving us a vision of what leadership and service could be. Give your peace to his family and friends who mourn him with a depth that only you can know. Amen. Please remain standing with me as Arnie's distinguished service to his nation will be honored by the members of Navy Region Southwest Funeral Honors Team. They will be offering a rifle volley of 3 shots, the playing of taps, then his son Brian will do a piping. The flag will be presented to the family, and following that presentation will be the presentation of the rounds. And as taps is being played, place your hand over your heart. Veterans, you may render a military salute. And the family will be seated during the flag holding and the presentation. be seated.
Hello everybody, my name is Ian McCarter, and I was able to know Arnie in his last chapter, and we have a songwriting program through the VA that honors the legacy of those that are nearing the end and to serve those that have lost their loved ones. And so when I met Arnie, he wasn't able to personally share his story, but he was able to write out this account of his journey, and I was able to study that pretty thoroughly along with some input from the family. And an analogy that we found was when he first came to the shores from being that Midwest boy, and he saw the ocean for the first time, and he set his toes in the Seattle waters, and he just looked out and he saw nothing but wonder and mystery. And it was that symbol of that first beautiful adventure. And of course, since then he saw the world, and he realized all those imaginations of the distant islands that he was yet to see. And so after some time he found that storm that some of you may know of that rocked the boat for about 3 days, and it was just relentless. And he said he was, at his wit's end pretty much, but he held on tight. And then when he resurfaced to the top of the ship, he saw that phenomenon called St. Elmo's fire. And it's back in the old days, it used to be a good omen for sailors that someone was looking out for him. And so when he saw that, it was a symbol of the journey ahead and how he was safe. And there was comfort in that after the struggle and the storm. And so when we came to that bed and we saw him on that next shore on that final journey, we were hopeful that he was facing it with the same wonder as he did all those years ago, and that St. Elmo's fire would guide him on his way. This is St. Elmo's fire for Arnie. Seattle shows, dipping my feet back at 18, wondering where those waves were born and what they'd seen. Dreams were wild, so in love with horizon smiles, squinting my eyes just to see the isles of misty dreams calling me. Dotted line had dialed me up, traded my clothes for a Dixie cup and a deep canteen. Golden gates to brand new worlds where I would play. Well, the sunsets in those days way out at sea were the best I'd seen. And I can see St. Elmo's fire. Still don't know why it came to me, but I can see St. Elmo's fire. That little child, free as he can be, heading out to sea. Stand astern, how my joy of the journey burns. Still I can't find a perfect word to tell you plain. Coming back, the storm would throw down a lightning crack. A charcoal cloud was burning black on a boiling wave for 3 long days. May it be that St. Elmo's fire guided him well, and that he lives on in our hearts, on our journey too.
Thank you, Dad. What a lovely tribute in song. Brian led us in pipe, tribute to his dad. And Guy is going to share more about this terrific man. He'll be doing a tribute, and then there'll be some open sharing as well.
I'm delighted that so many of you were able to gather here today for Arnie's memorial service on this magnificent ship in honor to celebrate his life. As we often say in the Navy, it's a fine Navy day. I think if you asked Arnie to give it a number on a scale of 1 to 10, he'd give it a 12. Before I share some memories with you about my dad, I first want to thank Linda, my sisters Penny and Jody, for organizing this event and all the hard work and care they put into planning and making it all possible. I also want to thank Carol Aiken and the entire team here at the USS Midway. Sorry. For hosting us today and putting everything together for this ceremony. Before I get started, I think it would only be fitting to recognize our youngest member here today, and that is little 1-year-old Navy Lynn Williams. She is Arnie's great-granddaughter, and with such a wonderful name, I think she's got to be the best and cutest tribute to her great-grandfather and her naval heritage. It's impossible to capture the essence of Arnie's life here today in this brief moment, but I'll do my best. He was in every sense of the word an American hero and a part of the greatest generation. He was a proud and decorated veteran, a gifted writer, a poet, a mentor, an avid golfer, a sharp card player, a crossword wizard, a real comedian, and most of all, a devoted son, brother, husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather. My dad was larger than life to me. He was like John Wayne. Tough, tall, handsome, honest, young, strong. I looked up to him in every way. He had a huge personality, a commanding presence, and a welcoming smile that naturally drew people to him. There was never any second guessing, and his confidence gave people reassurance and a sense of comfort. He always seemed to know what was best, and you always got the truth from Arnie, whether you wanted to hear it or not. At the same time, he was also had a gentle side, as anyone who ever got one of his famous Arnie hugs would tell you. When he wrapped those big arms around you, pulled you in and gave you that warm, firm hug, there was no better feeling in the world. He also had a soft spot in his heart for the underdog, and especially he loved young babies, puppy dogs, and kittens. He loved sitting in his favorite chair, snuggling up with his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and with one of his dogs on his lap. And there was a lot of competition for that coveted spot. As most of you know, the Navy was a big part of Arnie's life, and he loved it. He spent most of his adult life in a Navy uniform, which he proudly wore for 35 years. During his distinguished naval career, he served aboard 7 Navy ships, including cruisers, destroyers, amphibious assault ships, and supply support ships. He was stationed at 11 Navy stations around the world. He served during the Korean War, the Vietnam conflict, and the Cold War. And he participated in many Navy joint and international operations, too numerous to list here. But a few worth mentioning include the atomic weapons testing at Eniwetok and Bikini Atolls in the South Pacific in the 1950s, naval support for projects Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo space missions in the 60s, and naval operations during the Middle East crisis in the 60s and 70s. He crisscrossed the globe, sailing to the 4 corners of the Earth, crossing the equator and international date lines several times, and earning the honor of becoming a golden shellback. He literally sailed the 7 seas that took him around the world to distant continents, 33 foreign locations in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans, the South China Sea, the Sea of Japan, the Philippine Sea, the North Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Caribbean Sea. I probably skipped a couple, but I think you get the idea. He was a sailor's sailor. Some of you may not know how this all started, so let me tell you how Arnie got his start in life. Arnie was born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1933, in Watertown, South Dakota, to his parents Clifford and Phyllis Turnquist. Arnie was their second child, with his older brother Dick born the year before. His family grew to 8 children over the next 20 years, with his sisters Marilyn, Pat, Sandra, and Pam, and his brothers Dennis and Dean. And it's a joy to have Pam and Dean here with us today. Arnie's older brother Dick preceded him into the military service and joined the U.S. Army, becoming an airborne paratrooper. Arnie's 2 younger brothers, Denny and Dean, also joined the military and had distinguished careers in the Navy as well. Arnie spent his early childhood growing up in Watertown and then later in nearby Aberdeen. By the time Arnie was in high school, his family had moved to the far southwestern corner of South Dakota, to a little place called Igloo. Igloo was a small town. That was the town name given to the Army's Black Hills Ordnance Depot near the village of Provo. Not many people know or have even heard of Igloo, South Dakota, but it has a fascinating history, and if you're ever curious, you can find a lot of stories on the internet. Having lived in Igloo for several years, I'm sure Pam and Dean have lots of stories and memories they could share about this largely unknown but special place. At least it's special to me because that's where I was born. This is where Arnie would meet and fall in love with his future wife, Joanne Holt. But first, there was a war going on in Korea, and Arnie not only wanted to serve his country, he also had a strong yearning to get out and see the rest of the world beyond South Dakota. When he saw the poster, join the Navy and see the world in the local post office, that was his moment, his calling in life. I also like to think he was influenced by his Nordic heritage, and that he was drawn to the sea, similar to how his Scandinavian ancestors and the Vikings felt the pull of the ocean and the urge to get out and explore the world. So at 18 years old, Arnie left his family in September 1951 and enlisted in the Navy. After 3 months of boot camp at the Great Lakes Navy Training Center in Chicago, Arnie was sent here to San Diego for 4 months of Radioman A school. He didn't like the idea of going back to school so soon after high school. But as he later said, like a lot of things in life, it turned out to be exactly what he needed, and he was surprised at how much he loved being a radioman. In May 1952, Seaman Apprentice Arnie Turnquist was sent to Oakland, California, where he joined his first ship, the USS Arequipa, AF-31, a Navy provision store ship that provided supplies to the Pacific Fleet. Arnie spent the next 3 years on the Arequipa, where he excelled as an expert radioman and was advanced in rank 4 times up to radioman first class. He often said that he grew up on the Arequipa, and it's where he discovered his love of being at sea, and that he learned more about being a sailor on that first ship than all of his other duty stations combined. During the Korean War, Arnie was the only radioman stationed aboard the Arequipa, which was a lot of responsibility for one young sailor. He had to operate the ship's communications equipment and provide around-the-clock communications between the Arequipa, other ships in the task force, and Pacific Fleet headquarters. He became highly proficient working high-speed CW ship-to-shore circuits with his headphones on day and night, tapping out and reading Morse code and copying and monitoring the fleet broadcast. His efforts helped the Arequipa coordinate supply operations with the combat ships of the task force, enabling them to stay on station near the shores of the Korean Peninsula, supporting the Army, Marine, Republic of Korea, and other UN forces. After the armistice in Korea, Arnie returned to the U.S. aboard the Arequipa and was able to take some well-earned leave to visit his family in Igloo. This is when his courtship with Joanne blossomed, and they eloped to California, got married in June 1954. It was a small, quick ceremony with the Justice of the Peace in El Cerrito, not far from Oakland. as Arnie had to get back to the ship. Although he loved being at sea, Arnie wanted to get back together with his new wife and spend more time together. When his 4-year enlistment ended in September '55, he left the Air Equipment in the Navy and returned to civilian life in Igloo. He worked there for about 3 months. The sea must have been calling him, because after about 88 days, he hot-footed it back to the Navy. And since it had been less than 90 days, he was reinstated in the Navy as a regular first class. In December 1955, he was sent to the USS Helena, CA-75, the heavy cruiser stationed out of Long Beach, California. And then he departed a month later in January for a 6-month Westpac deployment to the Far East. Joanne was pregnant at the time of her first child, me, so she stayed home with her family in Igloo. Later, my mother had a telegram sent to my dad at sea the day I was born at the Army Hospital in Igloo. When he received it in the radio room while he was on watch. Since operational security was very strict, she had to be clever with the wording of the message. The message, which I still have, reads, and I quote, "Arnie, after night and day vigil, the submarine emerged at 2:49 p.m. with periscope. Weighing in at 6 pounds, half an ounce, 19 inches long, March 26, mothership doing fine, love, Joe." I can only imagine how proud and happy he must have been, but he had to wait another 4 months before seeing us when his ship got back to Long Beach. That was just the beginning of Arnie's growing family, as they were blessed with 3 more children over the next 8 years. My sister Penny was born on July 23, 1958 at Triple Army Hospital on the island of Oahu in the territory of Hawaii. This was a full year before Hawaii became a state. This was while Arnie was stationed at NAS Barbers Point. After leaving Hawaii, he was transferred back to sea duty for another 9-month tour, this time aboard the USS Saline County, LST 1101. They were shuttling supplies back and forth from the west coast up to Hawaii and up to Alaska. He also got promoted to Chief Petty Officer at this time. In June 1960, he got orders to transfer to the Philippines. My mother was 5 months pregnant at the time when we all took a very long flight across the Pacific to our new home at NAVCOM Stay San Miguel, Philippines. My brother Brian was born 4 months later on October 18, 1960, at the Naval Hospital at NAS QB Point, Subic Bay. We lived there at San Miguel for 2 years in base housing. Being an avid golfer, but not having a golf course to play on, gave Arnie the inspiration to build his own course. Along with some other chiefs, they designed and carved out a primitive 9-hole course with sand greens. He really enjoyed this brief time in the Philippines with his wife and 3 young kids. The fun and activities at the Chiefs Club, the nearby tropical beach at the base, and his very own golf course. In later years, this tiny course was expanded to an 18-hole course with grass greens. And as fate would have it, he got the opportunity 18 years later to visit and play on it in 1979 during a port visit to Subic Bay when he was stationed aboard the USS Chicago. He said it had become a beautiful course called the South China Sea Golf Club, and it even had a clubhouse. I can only imagine the pride and happiness he felt seeing the fruits of his labor from so many years before. Before we left the Philippines, there was, however, a traumatic incident that did occur involving my parents while we were in the Philippines, which some of you may remember, but out of respect for the young ones here today, I'll skip over the details. Suffice it to say, my mother was a hero that fateful Christmas night in 1960, and if not for her quick and bold actions and God's divine spirit, our lives could have turned out very differently. The silver lining to all this, however, was how it strengthened the bond and the love between my parents and the devotion they had for each other. After nearly 12 years at sea and living overseas, it was finally time for Arnie's first stateside shore duty. He got orders to the Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, Florida in late 1962, and that's where we lived the next 3 years. My parents bought their very first house then, and it was the happiest of times. My youngest sister, Jody, was born at the Naval Hospital there on October 20th, 1964. We were enjoying great neighbors, backyard barbecues, Little League games, watching Saturday morning cartoons with our dad, and taking summer vacations to visit relatives in South Dakota, Georgia, and Virginia. Arnie was busy as usual, as this was just following the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Cold War was heating up in the Caribbean and the Med. He was promoted to senior chief at this time and was transferred to the USS Turner, DDR 834, for a 6-month deployment to it. While on board the Turner, Arnie was one of the first in his year group selected for the new Warrant Officer program, and he was commissioned and promoted to W1 on December 1st, 1965. By then, the Navy said it was time to move again, and we sadly had to leave our friends behind in Jacksonville and travel cross country, which was the first of many. And he was transferred to California, where he got stationed aboard the USS Princeton in Long Beach. Arnie made 3 Westpac deployments to Vietnam between 1966 and 1968. And I can vividly remember the sadness and the tears we all had each time we waved goodbye to him at the pier. But then months later, the absolute joy and excitement we had watching the ship sail back into Long Beach as the Navy band played Anchors Away. It was also fun watching all the wives, children, girlfriends, and families rushing to the gangway to kiss their sailors. During Arnie's first deployment to Vietnam, the Princeton participated in the first Vietnam counteroffensive from March to August of 1966. Princeton was the flagship for the Amphibious Ready Group, and at that time they participated in Operation Jack Stay, where the Princeton and her crew came under heavy enemy fire. They were awarded the Combat Action Ribbon and the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross unit citation with palm for this action. Princeton went on to support several more operations and was awarded 2 more Gallantry Cross unit citations before departing the combat zone and returning home. By the summer of '68, the Princeton was due for a shipyard overhaul, and Arnie had been promoted to Chief Warrant Officer 2nd. Naturally, the Navy said it was time to move again, and Arnie received orders transferring in from the Pacific back to the Atlantic, this time to NAVCOM Stay Fort Allen in Puerto Rico. So we all loaded in the family station wagon for another cross-country trip to the East Coast and a flight to another overseas location. Fort Allen turned out to be a great duty station. We all had a lot of fun living there for 3 years, from '68 to '71. Arnie was assigned as the Tech Control Officer and later the CALS Officer, and was promoted to CWO3. Although it was a small base, Fort Allen had everything, and Arnie took advantage of everything there. The golf course, bowling alley, officers club, pool, outdoor movie theater, USO touring shows, freshwater and deep sea fishing. Arnie made the most of it. He also made many lifelong friends there, including Gary Gregson, an up-and-coming LDO, Commander Harold Olson, the base commanding officer, and his family, Lieutenant Commander Jack Dillett, the executive officer, and his family, the Dominici family, the Johnson family, our duplex neighbors, the Muellers, and Mel Purvis and his wife, Sonia. Sadly, we just lost Mel Purvis, one of Arnie's former golfing buddies, who passed away this past week in Virginia. After we left Puerto Rico, we spent most of the next 6 years in Virginia Beach. With the exception of 1 year, my mom and us kids spent in Mesa, Arizona, and a 1-year unaccompanied tour that Arnie made at NAVCOM Stay in Keflavik, Iceland. He was promoted to CWO4 there in December 1974. Prior to my graduation from high school that year, I enlisted in the Navy, and my dad had the honor and pleasure of swearing me in before I headed off to boot camp in Naps in Newport, Rhode Island. During this time in Virginia Beach, Arnie had the happy coincidence to run into Stan Jones, a childhood friend and neighbor from the time that they were growing up together living in Hickory, South Dakota. Stan was also in the Navy, stationed in Norfolk with his wife Kathy and their 2 children. And this reunion with Stan led to many happy family get-togethers, card games, parties, and a lifelong friendship between the Turnquist and the Joneses that both men cherished up to their final days. While stationed in Norfolk, Arnie served as the Assistant Communications Officer at ComOcean Sysliner and as the Quality Control Officer and Reserve Training Coordinator at NAVComState, NAVCAMSLAND in Norfolk. It was during this time that he marked a turning point in his life, which he later said not only saved his Navy career, but literally saved his life. He began his new life of complete sobriety on April 29, 1976. And just last year, on April 29, 2021, he was able to commemorate a special lifetime achievement when he received his 45-year AA recovery medallion. 1976 also was a special year in Arnie's life for another reason, because that's when my sister Penny was married, and he had the joy and honor of walking her, his beautiful daughter, down the aisle to give her away to her new husband Gary to exchange their wedding vows. As Arnie entered the twilight of his naval career, he approached it with a newfound purpose and enthusiasm. When his duty ended in Norfolk in late 1977, of course the Navy sent him and the family packing again on another cross-country trip back to California. This time the Navy was sending him back to sea duty aboard the USS Chicago, CG-11, a guided missile cruiser, homeported here in San Diego just across the harbor at North Island. While on board the Chicago, Arnie had the great fortune of being shipmates with Dave Hatcher. The kinship they shared developed into a lifelong friendship that continued and flourished over the next 45 years. Arnie made 2 Westpac deployments on the Chicago. On one of them, they made a work visit to Sydney, Australia, which he said really became a high point for him. I was a midshipman at the time, and my graduation from the Naval Academy was scheduled for May 30th, 1979, the same day the Chicago was due to leave on a 6-month deployment. If that wasn't enough, my wedding to my beautiful wife, Judy, was set for the next day at the Naval Academy Chapel. I know he didn't want to miss it, but I never knew how he pulled it off either, but somehow Dad pulled some strings, was able to miss ship's movement, and take enough leave to drive the whole family cross-country to Annapolis to be there for all of our commissioning week festivities, my graduation, and our wedding. And then afterwards, he had to quickly fly out to catch up with his ship overseas. I don't know how many other fathers would have done that, but that's the kind of man my father was. And I also like to think that maybe he just didn't want to miss out on getting that silver dollar for being the first one to give me my first salute. Either way, it was a special moment. It wasn't long after that that Arnie was able to enjoy a similar occasion when he had the honor and pleasure of swearing my brother Brian into the Navy. He was so proud of Brian for joining the Navy, and he often said those were the moments that were so special to him. Brian went on to have a long and illustrious Navy career of his own, retiring as a senior chief bosun's mate. We were a true Navy family, including my mom, the quintessential Navy wife, and both my sisters having grown up as Navy brats. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's a term of endearment among military families. When Arnie was finished on the Chicago, he spent the next 5 years on shore duty here in San Diego, working at the NAVComState at North Island, the Naval Training Center, and at the Navy's Alcohol Rehabilitation Center. ARC was a whole different world for Arnie, but he thrived in it, and it would open the door and lead him on a new path to a new career in life. That would have to wait a couple more years, though, as the Navy wasn't done with him yet. Instead of letting him retire in San Diego, the Navy transferred him cross-country again, back to Norfolk, because his knowledge and expertise were too valuable. He was just too good to let go, and they needed him to help train a new generation of radiomen at NAVCAMSLAND, where he had been 10 years before. At the completion of that tour of duty, he was recognized for his outstanding dedication and 35 years of service to the Navy and the nation, and he was given a retirement ceremony with full military honors. Many men would have been content to settle into a recliner at that point, but Arnie had a new mission in life, and he was just getting started. He had a calling and a natural gift for helping people, and his experience as the training director at the Navy's Alcohol Rehabilitation Center led him to a new job at the Betty Ford Center in Palm Springs, and it was love at first sight. He absolutely loved working there, and he loved the people he was working with. He often talked about Dr. West, who he considered one of his real heroes, and more recently Dr. Harry for his contagious sense of humor. He said that witnessing the miracle of recovery for so many and being a part of it was a true blessing for him. He also loved working with the medical students who came through the professional and residence program, and later on he had a very rewarding experience working in the focused continuing care department, following up with patients after their treatment to help them stay focused on their recoveries. Arnie said this helped to strengthen his own recovery, and those he worked with at the Betty Ford Center were some of the most dedicated and fun people he ever was with. Grandchildren were now becoming a part of Arnie's life during this time, and he absolutely adored them. His first three grandsons, Jeffrey, Timmy, and Joshua, came in quick succession in 1980, 81, and 82. They were soon followed by two granddaughters, Jennifer in 1983 and Heather in 1986. In 1994, my youngest sister Jody was getting ready to marry the love of her life, David. And Arnie was there once again to walk his lovely daughter down the aisle. 2 years later, in 1996, came another grandson, Dominic. And then two more granddaughters, Sebi in 1999 and Shelby in 2002. All his grandchildren became a big part of Arnie's life, and he loved watching them grow up and participating and sharing in their special moments and events as much as possible. Whether it was their baptisms, birthdays, family trips and vacations to South Dakota, Virginia, Maryland, going to their t-ball, baseball, soccer, kung fu, swimming, and diving sporting events, attending their high school graduations, and even a couple of their weddings. Arnie was their biggest supporter, and he loved them all very much. Holidays were extra special with Arnie, and he really enjoyed watching the grandkids opening presents on Christmas, seeing them dressed up in their Easter best and running around collecting Easter eggs. A highlight for Arnie then, and he really loved Halloween, was the legendary Halloween pumpkin carving contest he enjoyed with Jody, Dave, Damo, Seppi, and Shelby. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up at least one of Arnie's many other talents, and that was cooking, believe it or not. He loved food, and he knew his way around a kitchen, let me tell you. If you were lucky enough to enjoy his legendary sportsman's breakfast, eggs a la goldenrod, and other delicious meals, you know what I'm talking about. 1998 was a fateful year for Arnie and our whole family, because that's when we lost Joanne, his wife of 44 years and the mother of his children, and grandma to their 6 grandchildren. She was taken from us much too soon, and it was a devastating loss for everyone, especially Arnie. Joanne and Arnie grew up together. They were high school sweethearts, and they had shared an incredible life together that took them to faraway places like Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and all around the country. They raised 4 children, and since Arnie was gone so often, for months or longer at a time, she had to do much of it alone. But she was the epitome of a Navy wife and mother, and there wasn't anything she couldn't do if she didn't put her mind to it. This was a difficult time for Arnie. He was overwhelmed with grief and somewhat adrift at times, not knowing how or when he would recover from her loss. Over the next couple years, his sorrow began to ease, and he slowly started to regain his balance. This brings us to Linda. Arnie said it was the best. He said it best when he called this time in his life another God shot. He was convinced God put Linda in his life at precisely the right time when he needed her most. He said when she came into his life, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted from him. He fell in love with her from the beginning of their relationship, and we were overjoyed when they chose to get married. Linda was like a breath of fresh air for Arnie, and together they enjoyed lots of new adventures and experiences. In addition to Linda, there were her daughters April and Tracy, and their husbands Chris and Brian, and their kids Everett, Nathaniel, Grace, and Violet, who welcomed Arnie into their families and made him feel special as well. Linda was very protective of Arnie, and as he aged and started to slow down and his health started to decline, she was constantly by his side, nurturing him, encouraging him, and doing everything she could to give him the best care possible. That wasn't easy by a long shot, because if you knew Arnie, he wasn't the easiest of patients. He could be very stubborn and feisty, and mostly he didn't want to become a burden. But Linda didn't see Arnie as a burden. She rose to the challenge and nursed him and looked after him with tender, loving care. Even after the ravages of Alzheimer's had taken most of Arnie's abilities away, Linda stayed by his side all the way to the end. Linda, I just want to say that I'm eternally grateful for your loving devotion to Arnie, and to remind you that you made the last years of his life happier and more fulfilling than he could ever have imagined, and how much he truly loved you. In closing, I want to say again how impossible it is to recount and name all the people, events, and memories that made up Arnie's life. As I said at the beginning, Arnie wanted us to use this day to celebrate his life. It's okay to shed a few tears and feel sorrow and sadness that he's no longer with us, but at the same time, we should all feel a sense of pride and profound love for having had Arnie in our lives. He absolutely lived life to the fullest, and he lived it well. He leaves behind a wondrous and everlasting legacy that lives on in each and every one of us. He is now at peace, and we can rest assured that he is in the loving embrace of the Lord, smiling down upon us with endless joy. May you have fair winds and following seas.
There are so many here that has so many wonderful stories to share about Arnie, but we'd ask you to share those when we have the reception. Yes, it's time. Sebastian, would you mind coming?
Talk to me and tell me Navy stories until I would stop crying, or until I eventually would listen to him. And I love those stories, and I'm grateful for them. And I'm grateful that he inspired me in so many ways and inspired so many of us. And I'm grateful to have Navy as a walking reminder. No more a watch to stand, O sailor. You are outward bound on an ebbing tide. 8 bells have rung. Dog watch is done, and new berth awaits you on the other side. Your ship is anchored in God's harbor, and your shipmates, sailors of the Lord, are mustered on the deck to greet you and hide you as you come aboard. Look sharp, that hand is you, old sailor, and you'll be sailing out on heavenly seas. May the wind be ever at your back. Fair weather and Godspeed.
fondest memories is him showing up every day with Starbucks for Linda, and then later on, dutifully would show up in the kitchen for lunch. The highlight of my week if I got to share lunch or two with him. And for some reason, he was feeling very philosophical on one of those lunches, and we started talking about getting older and running out of time. Not my favorite subject. And I looked at him and I said, well, what do you think about retirement? And he said, don't we save lives? I said, yes, we do. He said, well, how do you retire from that? So,
On behalf of the Churchless family, thank you so much for your expressions of love and support displayed in the presence of your attending today here at Arnie's Celebration of Life. Please stand with me for the benediction. Eternal Father, strong to save, we ask your blessing as we conclude this memorial service for Arnie. In love and concern, let us remember his family and friends in our prayers. And bless us with the realization how precious life is, and help us to fulfill each day with beautiful memories of sharing and assisting others and using the talents that you've given us. This we ask in confidence in your fatherly love. Amen. Thank you so much for being here today, and remain for the time of celebrating his life and sharing Arnie stories. I'm sure that you've got plenty of them. The family has asked you to remain for this time of reception, and let's celebrate. Thank you so much for being here.